Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm about to go over the Steelers' day 3 picks, what they got and what they didn't get, and what it sets up for what they still need. All that here and more on a bonus episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the app that you need to download on your phone if you want to get the best tickets out there where in your local area. Game Time, download Game Time app today and get use code Locked On NFL for $20 off your first purchase. More on them later. Let's talk some things here, Steelers fans. We've talked about Troy Fautanu. We've talked about day 2. I thought day 2 was fantastic for the Steelers, but we talked about what it set them up for day 3 and what they still needed. And we thought maybe they could get another wide receiver. Maybe they'd get a slot corner. None of that happened. They got they got a guard in Mason McCormick, a defensive lineman in Logan Lee, and a cornerback in Ryan Watts, who's more of a longer cornerback that's set up to play the outside. Some people suggest he could play safety because he did play safety for a little bit, but at 6'3", I think he's more of the prototype corners that they're trying to build with guys like Corey Trice, Darius Rush, guys that aren't costing them a lot in draft capital to get and are working out for them in their and guys that they're hoping to develop as future partners for Joey Porter Jr. in their new defense. But let's start with the first pick here, Mason McCormick, because a lot of people thought the Steelers would go in a lot of different directions here. And when I looked at Mason McCormick, at first I was like, okay, I know that name. I've seen a few things of him. Let me go back through my notes and let me go back through like other things, do some research. And it does make sense for one specific reason, because we've been talking about figuring out the offensive line. The next thing the Steelers have to do on this offensive line, not this year, but probably next year or the year after that, is figure out what they're going to be doing at guard, because James Daniels has been playing well. I graded him. I think I graded him as the best offensive lineman next to Isaac Seumalo last year. But I graded him as a B plus player for them last year, and that was a plus for them on the offensive line. But his contract is up after this season. And so there's a big question. What do the Steelers do at guard in that situation if he's gone? And so then you'd have a huge hole that you have to fill again. And then you have to invest another top draft pick if you're going to go guard. So there's questions there. So where Mason McCormick comes in is he's a 4th round pick who tested very well. He had a 5.08 time in the 40-yard dash, so he can move. His vertical jump, his broad jump, his shuttle, his cone, he's explosive and he's agile. He had a 9.96 relative athletic score. That's pretty doggone good. That's just behind Graham Barton. And that's not to say he is Graham Barton, but this makes sense as a high upside type of guy that you can get and turn into, and his tape shows that he's a physical, road grading mauler of a guard that wants to run block. And I was trying to think of comparisons. And at first I was like, let's compare to James Daniels. He's like, oh, that's not James Daniels' style. James Daniels is more of an all around, really good technician. And then I realized it, because then I thought about who was the last guard this team selected in the 4th round. And I may be mistaken of who the last one, but the last one that probably comes to mind for all of you is Kevin Dotson, who the Steelers took in the 4th round of the 2020 draft. And lo and behold, I looked at it. Kevin Dotson and Mason McCormick have a lot of similarities in their measurements alone. Kevin Dotson's hand size was 10.5 inches. Mason McCormick's was 10 inches. Mason McCormick's arm length is 33 and 7/8 inches. Kevin Dotson's is 33 inches. Kevin Dotson and Mason McCormick both 6'4", right around the same weight, 310 for Kevin Dotson, 309 for Mason McCormick. The biggest difference is Kevin Dotson, because of his injury history, didn't test in his offseason, and so there was a lot of question marks as far as what his athleticism would measure out to be, whereas Mason McCormick tested and did very well, and he did so at a small school also like Kevin Dotson. So I think that's an interesting comparison. Not to say that he is going to be Kevin Dotson, and also Kevin Dotson for the Steelers is playing differently than he is right now for the Rams. We'll also see if that sustains for the Rams. I wonder if he can, if that was a flash in the pan like we saw at times for the Steelers, or if that's going to be a long-term success story. I hope it is. Kevin Dotson's a good dude, and I love covering him. But just seeing his inconsistency in Pittsburgh makes me wonder, will the inconsistency rise up in Los Angeles? But regardless, for Kevin Dotson, Mason McCormick to me is the potential guy that you're going to sit behind these guys. And he's in a very similar position as Kevin Dotson. If you remember, Kevin Dotson was drafted in 2020. So the Steelers had their guards. Matt Fowler was starting a guard because I think Ramon Foster had just retired. And then David DeCastro was the other guard. But the Steelers knew that they were probably going to be moving on from one of them, Matt Fowler, who left the team in free agency that next year. And then they didn't know that David DeCastro was going to have to retire because of an injury that ended his career a lot shorter than they expected. But Kevin Dotson was the guy they drafted with plans like, hey, he's probably going to have to develop into a starter real soon, or you're going to have to reinvest at the guard position like they have. And so I think Mason McCormick is another attempt at that, but a guy with a really high upside on his athleticism, and someone that, again, he won't have to start this year, but now he's a guy that you can project to maybe roll into the starter position if you think he's ready, and you can't afford James Daniels next year. Then you have an option there. You also have Spencer Anderson last year that you drafted super late in the draft, who's supposed to be extremely flexible in the offensive line. But let's say also the Steelers, let's say they do re-sign James Daniels. Isaac Seumalo's contract shortly after that, and he's a bit older. Like people are wondering how much longer will he be in the NFL. So Mason McCormick gives you a little bit of flexibility to address either guard position if either one of the older guys on the team were to leave. And James Daniels is actually not that old; he's like late 20s. So I mean, if they sign him long term, that'd be ideal for both parties. But it also might be James Daniels also might price himself out of what the Steelers want to pay him. But regardless, I think Mason McCormick is a good backup guard option to what they're trying to do right now. I think that is the bottom line. He has a high upside with his athleticism. He's a physical guy, so he fits the type of football that they want to play. There's no questions about that. And if he turns into a starter by year 2, that's a big win for the Steelers. So that's where they went with Mason McCormick. Again, following along the lines of what they're trying to do with Faltanu, following the lines with Zach Frazier, and last year with Broderick Jones. They are trying to build this offensive line for the future. And I don't know if Mason McCormick will be it, but he certainly has the traits that you want to be part of that picture of the offensive line. I want to talk about the other picks here, Logan Lee, Ryan Watts, but also what the Steelers didn't get and what that will lead into for their next moves in free agency. I'm recording this all Saturday, late afternoon, early evening. So excuse me if there's undrafted free agents or other moves that have happened since then, but we will cover all of those in our full Monday episode. But like I said, I'll get to the other 2 picks here in a minute. All right, y'all, right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the app you need to download to your phone right now. Game Time is an app that you can download and get tickets to any events. Like in Pittsburgh, if you're looking for the big Kenny Chesney concerts coming out this summer, guess what? Game Time is going to help you out here. Or maybe you saw that Monica's coming to town this year. You can get tickets for that at Game Time as well. Game Time gets you so many different tickets, and they get you the best prices guaranteed every single time. And then they have a special deal for their best price guarantee. But go to Game Time today. It's an app you can download right to your phone. And when you download Game Time, you'll see all the different options. Game Time even lets you book tickets up to an hour after your event has started. So if you're running late or you're scrambling to try to find best price options, and you also want to make sure that you're not getting scammed, so that you can make sure you get the best seat in the house, Game Time has an app that lets you see the seats from the app, so you know that you're getting the price that you want. And the Game Time best price guarantee means that you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section in a row for less somewhere else, Game Time gives you 110%. Credits you 110% of the difference of those prices. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase, or go to the website GameTime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're also brought to you by Monopoly Go, the app that you need to download right now today to get in and start having fun, because Monopoly Go is a competitive game, and I'm a competitive person. I grew up playing Monopoly. Whenever I won Monopoly in my house, it meant I was wearing a championship belt around all the time and talking all sorts of trash. Well, now I can wear the belt around and talk all sorts of trash every single day to all my friends and family who play Monopoly with me on Monopoly Go. It's an app that's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a super popular game. It's super fun. If you ever liked Monopoly, you're going to love Monopoly Go. It's a new twist on Monopoly where you can play on hundreds of different Monopoly boards in crazy locations, build up your own cities, and bring in big money. Best part, you can still beat your family and friends, whether you charge them rent for iconic Monopoly properties like Boardwalk and Park Place or heist your friends' vaults. All of it can be shown on the Monopoly leaderboards. Get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show here talking about the Steelers' day 3 picks. Now, I want to go into the next guy, Logan Lee. He was the first of the 6th-round picks. There were 2 6th-round picks. Remember, the Steelers didn't have a 5th. They didn't have a 7th. They had a 4th and 2 6th-rounders. So that's how the process went here. But I sense a trait, a series of traits here that Steelers are going for. They're going for athleticism in the lower rounds, which I particularly like. If you can't get guys that are if you can't get guys that are superstars in the early rounds or guys that have all the traits, get something that's going to really work for you in the later rounds. And if you get guys with great technique, that could be awesome. But you know what? Technique is something that's taught, and that's kind of like your height, right? That's kind of like, like, hey, like you've learned what you need to learn, but if your athleticism is peaked there, you might not be able to grow much more than what you were in college. Whereas if you have a high athletic profile and maybe you just need to sharpen your technique and get better at those things, that can mean that you might have a higher ceiling. And that's where I think guys like Mason McCormick, who we talked about in the previous segment, and Logan Lee, who we're about to talk about now, also have. Logan Lee is 6'5", so he has the length that you want of a defensive tackle, but he's 281, so he's really thin. He's a smaller guy out of Iowa, and he was a good player for Iowa. I think he was a decent Big Ten pass rusher up the middle, very quick, very agile, twitchy to kind of create pressure up the middle. But if you ran at him, it was a problem because he just wasn't thick enough and strong enough at the point of attack to turn away the run. But that's something that, again, he can grow into. He can put on 15, 20 pounds of muscle. Ask Stephon Tuitt how much weight he put on when he joined the Steelers at different points of his career, because he was trying to figure out what his best playing weight was. But I think Logan Lee will be an interesting prospect. The guy that I compared him to as far as recent draft picks was Isaiah Loudermilk. Not saying he is Isaiah Loudermilk, because I know some people are like, well, why would you want that guy? He hasn't worked out in Pittsburgh. But when I do that is as far as the build, Isaiah Loudermilk, 6'6", Logan Lee, 6'5", Isaiah Loudermilk, 274, Logan Lee, 281. When Loudermilk got to Pittsburgh, he had to learn how to play with a new weight. And there were times it flashed potential, but it hasn't worked out. But where Logan Lee has over Isaiah Loudermilk is that he has lots of good athletic traits. Their 40-yard dash times are the same, but again, 40-yard dash times for defensive tackles, that's not a big deal. But where does he do a little bit better than Isaiah Loudermilk? And it's in his explosiveness and in his agility drills. He had a better vertical jump, better broad jump, better shuttle time, better 3-cone time, all than Isaiah Loudermilk. Some of those were marginal, but some of those were also, it's still, I think, a showing collectively that he is a better athlete coming out of college than Loudermilk. He's also a 9.2, Logan Lee, that is, a 9.2 relative athletic score, whereas Isaiah Loudermilk was more of a 7.99. It doesn't mean that Logan Lee is going to turn into the next Brett Kiesel, but maybe he will. But there's upside there, and I think that's what the Steelers are drafting for, because they need help on the defensive line to develop. They need someone to come there. We talked about going into this draft class, it would have been nice for them to get a Mason Smith or a Braden Fisk, but they had other needs, and those early needs they addressed. And I think that everyone can be happy about the offensive line and the receiver they got, and Peyton Wilson was a great value to get at 98, but defensive line was a position they could have hit on this draft that they didn't hit on early. So get a flyer in the late rounds. If he develops, great. If not, oh well, you missed on a 6th-round pick. That happens every single year to every team, as far as how the draft process works. So Logan Lee was your other pick. Your other pick here was also on defense, was Ryan Watts, a cornerback out of Texas. Now, if you look at Ryan Watts, he's officially listed at 6'2", but if you look at the draft profile, technically he's like 6'2" and like 7/8 or something like that. So he's very close to 6'3". So he's almost 6'3", 208. But that's the length of what the Steelers are looking for at corner now, right? Like Joey Porter Jr. 6'2". Corey Trice, I think, is 6'2", 6'3". Darius Rush 6'2", 6'3". They long corners that can use that length to play with taller, bigger, physical receivers and also show the ability to run with them. And that's one thing that Ryan Watts does show. He can flip his hips. He's not a stationary guy, and he had a decent relative athletic score. Again, going with the traits of all these other low round pick guys that the Steelers brought in. He had a 9.12 relative athletic score, 40.5-inch vertical, which was pretty good for this cornerback class. Broad jump was good. Shuttle time was good. 3-cone was good. So good explosives, good agility drills. The one thing he didn't have was straight line speed, a 4.53 in his 40-yard dash. But again, that's a little bit fine when you're a taller guy. You don't need to be blazing. You need to be good in your technique. And the few clips that I saw of how he when he was playing, press man coverage or even sometimes a little bit off man coverage, he did show the ability to flip his hips, turn, and stick in the hip pocket of wide receivers. Now, there's some people are going to say he's more of a free safety because he did play some free safety, and he showed his ability to play there. That might be some flexibility that the Steelers might work in at some point, but I'd be willing to bet what they're going to do is they're going to say, hey, right now, Ryan Watts, if you want to make this team, you got to go be good on special teams and work your way against Corey Trice and Darius Rush. And one of y'all going to have to prove to us at some point that you have the future to be the cornerback too. It's clear the Steelers are going to go with Adante Jackson as cornerback 2 next to Joey Porter Jr. this year. And we'll see what they do at slot corner. And I want to talk about that briefly next. But Ryan Watts, to me, is just another long corner, and that's not to just diminish him, but he fits the profile that the Steelers are building for what they want in their outside cornerbacks, and I think that's a fine thing. Now you have 3 different options as far as young guys that you're not paying any money for, if one of them develops into the next starting cornerback next to Joey Porter Jr. for the next few years, great, awesome, and you spent very little draft capital to get any of them, because Trice was a 7th rounder, Watts was a 6th rounder, and I think they picked up Rush off the practice squads. They didn't even lose anything to get him. So I think that's what the Steelers are going for there. And if none of them work, oh well, you spent zero real capital on it, and then you just you could try to get another veteran next year or draft high at cornerback next year, whatever. But still, the getting of these 3 positions on day 3, the Steelers do not get a second wide receiver, which I thought that they might try to do. Brendan Rice was a guy I thought that they might target, as a guy that could fit what they were trying to do. At least get another outside wide receiver who could play with Roman Wilson and George Pickens and Calvin Austin. I think he's in the mix there. But Calvin Austin, again, is a smaller guy, and Roman Wilson's also a smaller guy. Roman Wilson's only 5'10". That's taller than Calvin Austin, but there's people, looking at Roman Wilson like he's going to be a slot. And if he's a slot, that's going to limit where Calvin Austin can play unless they're willing to move him all over the formation and do some really creative things with Arthur Smith's offense. Point being, though, the Steelers didn't get that position, an outside receiver on day 3. They also didn't get a slot cornerback, which leads me to believe they're probably going to dip in free agency for that. It might even be a returning person. Shannon Sullivan's still available. Patrick Peterson's still available. And also there's the report from Jerry Dulac that Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan met with Cameron Sutton in Pittsburgh recently. And that's interesting to me because Cameron Sutton, of course, as you remember, was a very good cornerback for the Steelers for several years, got hired away before last season in free agency to the Lions. The Steelers thought they were going to bring him back. He went with the Lions contract offer, but then if you weren't following the news back in March, a report came out that he was wanted for domestic charges, and was on the run. I think he eluded police for like 2 weeks before he turned himself in. Those charges haven't been dismissed. It's no longer, I think, a felony charge. It's now a misdemeanor domestic charge, and I believe his arraignment is this week. I'm still working on all the details here. There was a rumor that he threw his girlfriend his partner out the window, but the complaint that I read said it was more of a physical altercation where he did injure her. I'm still going to try to dig out what those are, because I think that's the bottom line is the Steelers. Cam Sutton was a great player for the Steelers, a really good player and a good locker room presence for the Steelers for many years. So when I saw that report, I'm like, wow, never got that from interviewing Cam Sutton. He always seemed like a very thoughtful person who was very nice to everyone in the room. And most reporters appreciated Cam Sutton, sometimes even too nice to us in giving us full answers sometimes. So that caught me off guard. And I'm intrigued to still learn what else is going on here. We still don't know what actually happened with this case. And I bet you the Steelers are trying to say, look, Cam, we had a great relationship with you, but we need to know what the heck actually happened there, because we can't be bringing back a person who's a domestic abuser. That's a terrible message and not good for the team at all, and just something that I don't think that you want to do in today's NFL. But who do they get at slot corner? We'll find out. I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode. Again, this was just a sort of a bonus episode. I'm releasing it like late Saturday, early Sunday. Hopefully it gets you through the rest of the weekend. And then Monday, I'll be back with a regular full episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Thanks again for tuning in here on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our daily episodes as well as bonus content like this one. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'll see you Monday on the full episode here of the Locked On Steelers podcast.